So this is the fifth, I believe, episode of the Contextator. I'm very excited about the episode today. We're going to talk. So the conversation primarily probably will be in English, but I may say we'll happy to switch between English and Nepali. Like probably keep an informal tone. Uh, I'm very excited about today's conversation with Shubhanga Pandey. Um, he's joining me from Colombo today. He is an associate edit. He's one of the editors, acting editor of Himal Southasian digital that we in Nepal very well know the Himal Southasian previously in print. Today we are going to talk about media. हामीले especially यो कोभिडको वरिपरि like so many other things हाम्रो मिडियाको ल्यान्डस्केप मा पनि धेरै चेन्जहरू नोटिस गरेको छौँ. सो आजको मेरो मेन एक्सपेक्टेसन चाहिँ सुभाङ्ग हु इज एट द हार्ट अफ यो साउथ एसियन रिजनल मिडियामा कोलम्बो-बेस्ड भएर र द म्यागजिन हि वर्क्स फर फोकस पनि साउथ एसियन रिजनल भएर हामीले नेपालमै पनि केही एउटा एक दुईवटा मेजर डेभलपमेन्ट्सहरू ट्रेन्ड्सहरू मिडियामा देखिरहेको. सो एउटा चाहिँ कोभिडले कसरी त्यो ट्रेन्डहरूलाई एक्जाजरेट गरेको छ अथवा कुनै नयाँ ट्रेन्ड निकालेको छ अथवा वाट वाज अलरेडी ह्यापनिङ. सो एउटा अलिकति नेपालमा भइरहेको मिडियाको इन्सिडेन्टहरूलाई अलि लार्जर sort of regional र अलिक ग्लोबल मिडियाको ल्यान्डस्केप अर्डर कस्तो छ त्यहाँ हामी के कुरा गर्दैछौँ. सम अफ द मेजर ट्रेन्ड्स अराउन्ड वाट्स ह्यापनिङ एन्ड वाट वी सुड बी अवेर अबाउट भन्ने कुरा हो. सो I think very important topic, very relevant given the COVID and the global pandemic and the role of media in it. But beyond that, how should we observe how the media is moving? One is as मेरो conversation expectation. I'll mostly listen to insights and experiences of Shubhanga. I'll have like very few broad questions. So thank you very much for making the time, Shubhanga. I'm very excited to talk to you about how you are seeing these things.
No, thank you for having me. It's a very interesting topic, and I think one of the bigger topics I think over the last several months. So I look forward to the chat.
Yeah, thank you very much again. So let's jump in right away. मैले चाहिँ अलिकति स्पेसिफिकली साउथ एसियाको रिजनमा को मिडिया ट्रेन्ड्स र नेपालमा के भइरहेलाई कसरी बुझ्ने भन्नुभन्दा अगाडि why don't we start from अलिकति यो global trend को हिसाबमा can you put like what's happening in the media globally, or can you just give us a time and space एउटा अलिकति brief historical context? I think you have a certain एउटा time पनि where you want to think of like what's happening now. So why don't you put like the media trend in a global perspective to start with?
Sure. So if we just go back to, let's say, sometime in the middle of Bushko administration, Iraq war पछि हैन, and the kind of expansion of digital tools and technologies everywhere, was clearly happening was you're starting to hear a lot of stories about the decline of the print or decline of mainstream media. Now this especially I think accelerated after 2007, 2008. It's not clear if it's actually linked to the financial crash. तर त्यो समयदेखि चाहिँ यो narrative पनि अलि बढ्दै गएर आएको छ के. अनि so in the global north भनौँ हैन, or in places where mainstream media institutions have been part of democratic culture for decades, maybe even 2-3 centuries, ती ठाउँहरुमा चाहिँ the narrative was कि there's a lot of centralization happening. So you were seeing local newsrooms shut down. You were seeing like massive expansion of big cities, metropolitan media, especially broadcast media, or even certain pockets of print media, and largely because advertising industry was going in different directions, which happened to be very conducive for broadcast. But it also happened to be very debilitating for small media, okay? And this was kind of linked to again internet. If Fox could buy a small substation in a small town somewhere in the US, if they could, instead of having 4, 5, 10 reporters in the newsroom, if they just get a few technicians, exist on a host, and then just completely cut down the reporting side of things or keep it bare minimum, then all of a sudden, if they do the same thing throughout the country, and this began kind of in the US really, your Halka model, then you are all of a sudden saving a lot of resource, saving a lot of capital, making it easy for advertisers, and so that was the major tendency then. And this was, if you look at all the stories coming out then, this was kind of starting to happen. I think especially around Obama's time, this became the big news. People just had not been noticing it or talking about it in the same way. But I think democratic crisis, the rise of far right, your Tea Party was becoming very strong. Europe nationalist far right group or and then all of a sudden the conversation was about, is the West kind of is democracy failing in the West, decline by Rasa. So the media conversation was attached to that broad conversation. But there was also this kind of major economic element. The conversation in South Asia, global South South Asia, because of the population, I guess, was that print is actually still the king and is actually making greater inroads into Mofosalaru and Sansano town, because the stories that the appetite for reading was growing, or for some kind of content was growing. So actually, even as recently as last year, there were reports, studies suggesting that India mata also grow is a saturated print market. What was being ignored is that there are other forms of content now you can consume in media. What you see even in print, what you see in Indian print media, for example, a lot of it is not what traditionally is understood to be news. It's a mixture of advertorial, paid news, a lot of gossip. It's a very interesting social ecology, whatever it is. So it was starting to be very different from what was news, and probably the reason why it was growing so much. So there's a competitor all the way throughout. And it's not really alternative media platform on the internet. It's not websites like Wire or Scroll, for example. It was basically social media platform with attached various pages, things like WhatsApp, just for group or open pani huna sakchan, close pani huna sakchan. It's a very mixed kind of media environment. So त्यो चाहिँ ignore भइरहेको थियो. I think what COVID has done is kind of reminded us of that contradiction. But if you look at, what seems very clear is for print media, for example, and now global broadcast media also, the competitor is not the next big newspaper in town. It's actually YouTube and Netflix. It's when everything is consumed on the screen, right? The nature to the screen is the real estate, right? And then it doesn't really matter if you're producing news content, entertainment content, which is already that blurring was happening. We know India could news have we know how those things don't really there isn't a great separation. So so I think that was the basic picture was that there was this decline, particularly affecting major broadsheets, decimating local media. You're seeing that, of course, in South Asia, when organizations started making cuts, the first people to feel that were stringers or reporters in outside bureaus. So and they were already the least paid, the most exploited pool of labor in media. So that was being replicated here, Pani. But I think the old narrative, the print is still growing in South Asia because of growing literacy rate. I think that has to be questioned. But we'll have to wait for a few maybe years after oil shock. But from the very fact that broadsheet lay off you kind of get a sense that they have seen the changing waters.
I was actually going to come next about your in particularity the closures, particularly about India massive scale reporting. I think that maybe like you can switch to your observation, if any, on how what's happening in Nepal, particularly अब यो अहिलेको नेपाली मिडियाको ठुलो स्टोरी भनेको चाहिँ कान्तिपुर पब्लिकेशन्स डिसिजन टु shut down त्यो sister magazines-हरु like नारी and Nepal, like pretty prominent space भएको र एउटा मेमोरी इन्स्टिट्युसनल मेमोरी भएको म्यागजिनहरु shut down, प्लस अब ले अफहरु चाहिँ एकदम कमनली रिपोर्ट भइराछ हैन. So like within the whole COVID thing. So you can you reiterate if you would say हामीले यो is it COVID specific अथवा in line of your print could decline, what we are seeing in Nepal, is it in line with what we are seeing elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, print has never been a particularly profitable sector, and also we have to look at the business model of print, because it's also it's largely driven by advertisement. Circulation is never going to make, in many cases, not even 10% of the actual revenue, operating cost. So oil print cost the clear correlation is people aren't sending an advertisement. There's no money coming in through advertisement. It affects more than the revenue that comes through circulation. It affects how willing the advertisers are to put to spend money on those things. So that is the immediate shock. But then you also have to question how, because these major broadsheets investment is not centered in print media. It's actually the most costly part of businesses within media is broadcast. The most fascinating numbers that I've seen about COVID is broadcast has been the principal winner throughout COVID, even more than internet. Whenever there's a crisis on that, people turn on their TVs. They're less likely even now to go online. For some reason, we still associate journalistic credibility with television. So, and that was already the case in South Asia, Global South, but even in Northern Europe, for example, it's television is still seen as most credible for a number of reasons. Maybe, I don't know, you see, it seems like they're covering it live, they have cameras there, there's a lot of money that goes into the whole exercise. So that has gained a lot, which means they're also charging advertisers, more than they probably used to, or they have room to do that once the economy eases up. So that is one interesting thing. The main loser is print. In many cases, the same kind of big companies operate both print and television. So it's difficult to know the overall the company like a pressure it's one has to, one really has to wait. But one interesting observation I made was, I think it was AP1 managed to poach a number of Kantipur's television personalities, if I'm not wrong. So clearly there's interest and or ambition on the broadcast sector. And there actually, if you look online, certain television channels do better on YouTube than others. Even within broadcast, big television news or you see the same thing in India. For example, Times Now and Republic will have much better views than, say, NDTV ko news bulletin. And it's mostly to do with the kind of content they produce. नेपालमा त्यही डेसिबलको डिबेटहरु त हुँदैन, तर नेपालमा पनि सर्टेन खालको इन्टरभ्युजहरु आर प्रेफर्ड मोर देन लेट्स से सिम्पल न्यूज स्टोरी. सो इभन त्यो स्पेस पनि आई थिंक ब्रडकास्ट बिग च्यानल्सहरु मध्ये पनि सम पीपल हैव फिगर्ड आउट दिस वर्क्स एन्ड दिस डजन्ट एन्ड हैव मेड सर्टेन मुभ्स. So I mean that's something that's an exciting thing to look forward to. It might not improve the quality of journalism, but it will do, and it's something we saw maybe not so much in Nepal because the market is still smaller compared to, say, Pakistan or India. तर ती देशहरुमा चाहिँ के भएछ भन्दाखेरि after 2007-8 पछि there was a massive rise in income of people at senior levels of mainstream media, which means broadcast again was making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Overall, but there was still that increasing gap between people who work in print or official media and people who work at the very elite networks.
Right.
In Pakistan, what you've been seeing for 2-3 years is now they've been laying off people. They've been paying salaries very late. Nepal ma pani same cheez haina. Including in television stations. त्यहाँ चाहिँ एकदम mushrooming भएको थियो after Musharraf left or forced to leave.
Yeah.
So a lot of money was put in television channels from businesses, from people close to the armed forces, from all kinds of places,
Yeah.
because that was seen as the new booming sector, and also a place to um, kind of legitimize certain kinds of profits made in other
Yeah.
sectors. So, I mean, I have no idea if this is the case in Nepal.
Yeah.
But sometimes certain sectors within the industry might be kept alive a bit longer because of that also. So it might not reflect what's happening vis-a-vis readership. Again, something to wait and see, I think.
Yeah. So I do want to come to the whole how the COVID the global pandemic might be affecting it. तर त्योभन्दा अगाडि नि एउटा यो यही अब in view of the sort of the trends that you're describing in the region, मलाई एउटा यही जोडिहाल्न मन लाग्यो स्टेट र मिडियाको रिलेसन्स चाहिँ हामीले कसरी इभल्भ भएको देख्दैछौँ. I'm pretty sure in terms of like अब एउटा त प्योर प्रेस फ्रिडमहरू जस्तो इन्डिकेटरहरूमै पनि मेबी भेरिएन्स होला विदिन द रिजन हैन. अनि अर्को कुरा चाहिँ अब in your sense where do we stand in Nepal, like because you're familiar with it probably, you know, at the receiving end of not so pleasant state policies, maybe you and your reporters yourself. So what is the state media relations in the region, and how if at all is that evolving?
नेपालकै भन्नुपर्ने हो भने I feel, but one is always biased when I guess one knows a place best. It might be in the better half. I mean, if you just look at purely the kinds of arrests, not just number, but the kinds of arrests, maybe Nepal is in the better half, mostly because everyone else is also doing so badly. Himal moved to Sri Lanka, in fact, because after 2015, यहाँ चाहिँ डेमोक्रेसी र फ्रिडमको सन्दर्भमा राम्रा चेन्जेसहरू भएको थियो हैन, अलिकति मोर ओपन सरकार आएको थियो. So among the places that we looked at, Sri Lanka seemed the most open at that point of time. Some could argue India is more open for profit-oriented big business, but even that is questionable. But if you're not profit-oriented, India is also quite hostile. So, I mean, if one were to make a contrast between how the state is dealing with media, let's say in South Asia, but it extends to other countries in Asia also actually, and some parts of Eastern Europe, and how they're dealing with, again, places where media was an important institution for, since late 1800s maybe. The difference you see is, for example, when the word fake media is deployed, it is deployed by far-right nationalists in the US to delegitimize mainstream media, because they know the mainstream media, despite all its faults, places like New York Times and all, and we all know about the kind of reporting they've done in places that have had differences with US over foreign policy, but overall American domestic politics ko sandarbhama, if one considers them a positive force overall, the effort by far right is to delegitimize places like New York Times, Washington Post, and all of those places, CNN. In Global South, what you've seen is there isn't a lot of effort made by governments to delegitimize big media. Maybe because they feel they don't need to, that they when it's difficult, we can work things out. It's used to delegitimize mostly small independent media, activists are dissenting, this whole civil society mixture, which includes media activism, teaching professionals. So I think you can extend that to the general question of how the state is looking at media. if the kind of even if you look at the kind of language they're using to delegitimize activists or who are dissenting media, it's mostly by saying you are supported by outside
Yeah.
world, you know.
Yeah.
It's about nationalism, very easy. um, it's about in some countries, so it's about immorality. um,
Yeah.
Places where religion might be politically quite useful, it's about kind of hurting sentiments.
Yeah.
um, in India, all of this is true because the state is kind of going
Yeah.
all out on all fronts.
Yeah.
uh, in Nepal, maybe religion is starting to become bistar bistar. It's still
Uh-huh.
not quite as potent, but um, from what I see on YouTube, I spend too much time looking at crappy YouTube Nepali channels. So um, from like it's starting to become a thing. But I think I know whatever the state feels is the most useful way of going after, and GSM political currency bhako issues. So I think so they're trying to slap that on independent media. When
Yeah.
it comes to big media, I don't. I mean, in Pakistan, yes, the army through different ways is again going after big established media.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
seeing that opening up cases, 1 or 2 decades old cases to again frame people. Um, I mean, that's quite visible, but if they're doing that with big media, that the way they will deal with small independent media is sometimes it's only reported by rights organizations or
Yeah.
so that's the sad thing because you might not get the mainstream media might not even make noise out of it. It will still.
I want to like actually it's kind of really nice that you're making really nice segues for me. I do want to spend a little bit of more time talking about the new media, the independent media, right? Because there's a lot of interest, obviously, about, as you said, on the one side of this is like maybe the traditional broadsheet and print decline ma bhako एउटा side, र अर्को चाहिँ obviously the influence of technology in media and like how news is produced, packaged and consumed. I know, as you were
Mm,
saying, the screen as a real estate idea. So त्यो सेन्समा अब मैले रिसेन्टली त्यही बर्खा दत्तको इन्टरभ्यू सुनिरहेको थिएँ कि लाइक सी वाज like I think 5 years she was a television purist, and then now she's kind of like quite successfully, at least early indications, moving towards the more sort of the online content. I think we're beginning to see. अब एउटा चाहिँ maybe I'll keep the second part for later. So basically, let's start from what's that new media scene? What do we see? I mean, the independent media scene, the wires, the scrolls. हाम्रो आफ्नै कुरा गर्ने हो भने the record Nepal, होइन? So what's that space like? How is that evolving?
that is I mean, because I'm also in that same space, that's also
Yeah, and I'll follow up with your own magazine thing after this, right?
uh,
Okay.
so the interesting thing is these places are also trying to do the most innovative things, because they have to do, unlike ad supported media, they did not have a easy financial cushion. So they've always been flexing, trying to find new ways to sustain themselves. um,
Mm.
the Okay, so one way to look at it is to see COVID कसरी impact गर्यो,
Mm.
One impact that I saw was based on some survey which mostly looked at independent media that you define by thinking about organizations run by, let's say, from a couple of people to 20, 30 people. Um, and finances funny the same kind, so a couple of thousands to tens, 20,000 per month in that scale of operation.
Yeah.
So they said that they oversee that over the next 6 months they might have to lose about half their workforce.
Yeah.
And these are already very small places. Now,
Mm.
it's not because they are primarily, some of them are ad supported, but most of them aren't ad supported. But
Yeah.
what they anticipate is that, unfortunately, even though a lot of them are trying to be more reader supported, which I think is one of the futures, maybe not the future for every kind of organization, there are one possible route.
Mhm.
What they realized was, so far, even the most successful reader supported publications, with some rare exceptions,
Yeah.
um, they only make like 10% max, 10-20% max of their money from readers, because they still rely on a lot of grants,
Yeah.
donations, all kinds of things. These things, donations also kind of, they sometimes see spikes because of political environment. So even with COVID, some organizations say they reported seeing increase in donations, not necessarily subscriptions, but donations. But what happens is most of the money comes through grants, and your grant makers are also more keen on maybe public health and not
Yeah.
democratization. I know. So there's going to be some, I think, contestation within that space, and we'll have to see what that looks like. I think independent media people are also trying, and there's a wide variety of products that are coming up, and it might be podcast
Yeah.
appealing to a very niche audience, to fact check organizations.
Yeah.
So some of these have clicked and some haven't. Some are more likely to get readers and kind of create a community, and some might not. What they've very clearly done is occupy a lot of public space. So I think that's a good sign. Like even when they might not have been able to monetize it, anyway, it takes a few generation of subscribers. Okay? People will not pay for something immediately until they see it. In South Asia, the other problem is, one is we are not used to paying for digital news. The other is
I think that's
thinking
more
for the
globally true, Bunny. Like people, to America, there are only 50% people are not willing to pay for the news one day. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they will pay for things that look like news. I know it might, if it's
Yeah.
the local. When I talked about local media decimation, some
Yeah.
really successful organizations have, the local newsrooms have refashioned themselves into kind of slight paywall wacko
Mm.
publication, and made it really community driven, as opposed to being ad driven.
Yeah.
So giving members different kind of benefits, space to talk to
Yeah.
them, making them heard. South Asia also big problem is it's difficult to pay for things
Yeah.
electronically. On it, that seems to turn off most people. Okay? It seems like a small technical glitch that it seems to be the most important. People can't, after 3 clicks your attention goes away. So we already have that attention deficit
Oh, for
problem.
example, I would not be able to subscribe to Indian, let's say, newspapers by my Nepali card, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a much bigger problem. I know that people in independent media unfortunately cannot solve. Central banks or regulations are
Yeah.
also not always easy, and they have their own rationale. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's a very complex sphere.
Yeah.
But they can't rely on just one source of funding, and for unfortunate reasons, our people, journalists in the independent sphere, have to also act like fundraisers. They have to act like managers. They have to act like creative artists.
Yeah.
They have to act like you are obliged to do so many different things to make this work. So
So यसैमा नि I think add गरेर अलिकति एउटा again I think we will need more time to see how they evolve like more हैन in the coming days. तर यो अलिकति एउटा सानो कोर टिम राखेर अनि अलिकति कोल्याबोरेटिभ गर्ने हैन त्यो के रे थिम स्पेसिफिक गर्ने how much of that are we seeing?
You're seeing that on Zoom and everything, you are seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
In a way, it's a very interesting kind of flowering of civil society, and not like professional civil society, but people talking to each other, reading things, putting their kids on the screen. It's a very pure news. Social ecology is a massive thing, and there is that growth. But then to make it sustainable again requires some way to make money.
Yeah.
I think the ones that have succeeded most is where you make your reader feel more than just a passive receiver of news and information. આજકાલ newsletter, people are starting their own newsletters for very, again, niche interests. So I mean, but a lot of it is happening, and it also doesn't require a lot of money.
Yeah.
The setup is very simple, and I think we should have more of those. I mean, some of the best content can be found there, but there is a contradiction there also when it comes to news, because reporting is very expensive. investigative work is more expensive. So
Mhm.
the people who are passionate about these things don't have the resources to pursue it. The big media, which has the reason why New York Times can send someone to Delhi to do a story on migrant worker is because they have the resources to do that. And if those people are no longer seeing benefit in that kind of activity,
Yeah.
or if that is no longer viable, then we'll see. So that is my main worry also.
Yeah, maybe that's probably a good time. Like, I think that you're drawing in from some of your own experiences to, for example, for our audience and readers in Nepal, they have a Himal Southasian for a long time used to be a print regional magazine, you know? I
Yeah,
interned there in 2005. So,
yes,
के अरे,
many have.
so basically it has undergone a lot of like sort of like shifts in priorities. अहिले त अब लोकेसनै शिफ्ट भएर पहिला काठमाडौँ बेस्ड थियो, अहिले कोलम्बो बेस्ड पनि भयो हैन. So how are you sort of like weighing in your sort of like options around the changes that we're talking about? How do you define your magazine now? And of course, in terms of the theme and content, I think there's a solid sort of like a institutional established thing that Himal does, right? The original culture, politics, literature, history, something. But in terms of like the whole your medium, how you create and disseminate your news. So how are you thinking about it, and in what stage are you in that sort of, if at all, if trends are changing? So what are you guys up to at Himal?
So, so the main thing we wanted to do after we moved here was that print is not viable and not something that we might be best able to do. So in Nepal, it was monthly, the agadi especially monthly. Then around 2013, 14, 15, it was a quarterly, just long form writing. It was always running website despite all of those changes in the print form. But in Hypersystem, we wanted to do something that had been planned for a long time, was to start not a subscription but a membership program where, like I described, you try to a lot of people recognize us, but we also want them to engage with us and send us feedback on what we do, and we want to kind of grow that community. So we started a membership program just around a few months before COVID, and we also kind of changed the whole website. So we put all the archival content there just to make it more solid kind of thing already on the website. So the membership plan was to also the main plan was to increase our diversity of sources. We don't anticipate it being something that will cover the core cost, but it's a step in that direction. So we started that in mid-January, and it's been an interesting. We've been getting, I think, good response. Now, post-COVID, there was, again, like everyone else, we also felt that people are reading us a lot. So I think Himal has never been read as much on the internet before, but I think people are still not sure about what they're paying for. If it's a digital product, if you can't hold it in your hand. And so to make that more clear, we've been trying to think about, in addition to the website, which will have, let's say, longish articles, but which might not always respond to what's happening news-wise. So we started sometime in March a thing called South Asia Sphere, which is a roundup of news. But we might have one big headline and one news that isn't really there on mainstream media. So we try to kind of look at developments both ways, also big news, but also kind of things that are not being talked about. So that we've been doing. It's for now it's free, but we also want to make that part of a membership package. The other thing we are quite excited about is we're working on something that will have to do with books. So something we realize is the Himal Pandey here who are also interested in broader the world of ideas. They're keen on what Nayan book is talking about caste and engineering education, for example. They might be interested in China or India capitalism, history links, things that you can always, it's always there on the surface, but no one articulates it in a certain way, and then you find a book that has come around that does that. So we're we're building something. We are still at a conceptual phase, but hopefully in a few months we'll have something ready, which will try to kind of bring the world of quick journalism and academia, like try to find a middle ground that will appeal to people I think who like to read emails. So, but we realized that we can't compete with a news organization, for example. So Ambrose space is anyways that space of ideas, opinion, occasional long reportage from somewhere. I mean that has, if you look at since 2013-14, there was this whole growth of independent media. They've all been of a similar style with a few exceptions. So, but that is again a contradiction. We can't produce micro kind of level news.
So maybe alikati, and I can generalize it for others as well. For example, I have noticed it's been a while. Hamro record Nepalma pani they have this quite popular political current affairs round of ani मैले alikati. So is that a trend? किनकि अब for example Himal अथवा record which we associate with certain form of like long form engaged feature writing खालको, and particularly in relation to feature writing alikati a reporting that's very in depth, engaging, अनि a lot of effort and resources go into it, हैन? So त्यो मात्रै गर्नलाई is it acknowledgement on your part like that you do need त्यो engagement राख्न भए पनि you do need some sort of like more sort of the newsy current affairs kind of thing?
I think, I mean, current affair or talking about what's happening, the kind of thing we're thinking about, your headline roundup. It seems I was talking to someone and he was saying it's been around since like 18th century. So some form of curating that kind of product has been around, and I think that has always been the aim, to kind of nudge your readers. And there are debates on both sides, and maybe your news मैले 10 वटा ठाउँबाट पाउँछु, ट्विटरबाट पाउँछु, different newspaperबाट पाउँछु. I don't need a platform to do the same. But I think in most good, interesting cases of curation, we're also curating very particular thing. I mean, it's important to also know what not to put there, as important as what to put. So it's an acknowledgement that there needs to be sometimes a more current affairs voice that might be missing in your overall coverage. It's also an experiment, I think, for most people. I mean, no one really knows how this, what this business will look like in 2 years.
मैले त्यो अघि अलिअलि हामीले specifically generally त आइसक्यो, like you've already shared your thoughts on it, but like just to reinforce sort of अलिकति हाम्रो यो एउटा कुरा चाहिँ यो जुन one of these trends that we're discussing, त्यो कोभिडले के गर्यो, like what has COVID done to the media? Like if there's any particular thing, अब जस्तो हामीले त्यो layoffहरुको एउटा अब some people argue that it may just be an excuse, हैन? COVID might be an excuse in already sort of declining print, हैन? So what has COVID done particularly to the way we report and consume news, and alikati the TV ko popularity you've already touched on, just as a reminder summarized. I think that's something that people are thinking about, like COVID ko impact ho कि यो किनकि मलाई अलिकति problematic लागिरहेको particularly नेपालको केसमा जुन यो सबै shutdownहरु गर्ने, closureहरु गर्नेलाई चाहिँ exclusively त्यो COVID सँग associate गरेको, is that fair भन्ने आइडियामा?
I think it's difficult to answer without looking into their balance sheets, but what you can make an assumption is these are big kind of business conglomerates, and they have widespread interests. So some of the moves they make is actually not related to the immediate losses. For example, they might be looking at, if I retain these people 2 years down the road, can I still do that? So it's a very, its motivation is not journalistic at all. And it's also a cost of the model of journalism we have. It might also be, I mean, was it a Annapurna post? I think it was on My Sansar did a detailed breakdown of how the reporters were not directly fired, but were moved around, all kinds of playing going on. So so I think maybe it's a reflection that they were already feeling that this is not a very profitable sector, and this just gives an excuse to do, businesses do that every time there's a crisis. They kind of have a set of things that they wanted to do, and you kind of press the button at that point of time. Because I mean, my impression reading, for example, let's say some of these magazines, but also weekend editions, I mean, it was getting better, what had been Nepal's reporting has always, I think, in the last decade been much better than, let's say, kind of analytical historical pieces, and those were really coming up. So it wasn't because they were, I think there was enough reason to be able to sustain some really interesting good work. But I doubt, but I don't think the people making these decisions are also thinking about it the way a normal person thinks about it. And yeah, it's very likely they would make,
अनि त्यसैमा रिलेटेड अर्को कुरा चाहिँ अब अलिकति अब एउटा नेपालमा कन्सर्न भनेको द डेथ अफ म्यागजिन भन्ने खालको छ हैन. सो पर्टिकुलरली अब आई थिंक दे ट्रेडिसनली डु नट डु वेल बिजनेस वाइज. तर एउटा नेपाली मिडियामा म्यागजिनको, नेपाली ल्याङ्ग्वेज म्यागजिनको त फेरि रोल इट्स क्वाइट इम्पोर्टेन्ट आफ्टर 1990 हैन. सो बेसिकली particularly with the ending of Nepal magazine, यो अनि अलिकति एउटा अर्को ट्रेन्ड चाहिँ मैले पर्सनली नोटिस गरेको चाहिँ के छ भने अलिकति त्यो तिम्रो ब्रोडसिट न्यूज पेपरहरुलाई चाहिँ अलि फिचर हेभी बनाउने, अलिकति म्यागजिन कन्टेन्टहरु चाहिँ लाइक माइग्रेट टु द डेली हैन. आई मिन सो पर्टिकुलरली हाम्रो नेपाली ब्रोडसिटहरुको वीकेन्ड सप्लिमेन्टमा यु सी अ म्यासिभ शिफ्ट के त्यो अलिकति त्यो रिडेबल कन्टेन्ट आइडियामा चाहिँ त्यो त्यतातिर छ. सो व्हाट इज योर अब्जर्भेसन on the magazine side of things?
I mean, I was also pointing towards the same thing, that this has been the interesting journalistic trend, right? And as a reader pani, हो त्यो भइरहेछ. अब म्यागजिनको कल्चर साउथ एसियामा सबै ठाउँमै धेरै कमजोर भइसक्यो. म कोलम्बोमा छु, श्रीलङ्कामा. यहाँ चाहिँ 70s देखि 90s सम्म लङ्का गार्डियन भन्ने एकदमै राम्रो वेल एडिटेड ग्लोबली अवेयर प्रोग्रेसिभ खालको म्यागजिन थियो कि इट वाज लाइक almost like Himal of the 70s and 80s, and I think Connor was partly inspired by that when he saw it here when he was traveling. So, and India had, golden age of magazines, 70s, 80s. Pakistan had really at least two really good English language magazines that were shut down actually last year. Bangladesh ma English ma bhanda pani Bangla ma त्यो literary political खालको magazine culture एकदम rich. So that is all. It's difficult to find that anywhere. It is never a profitable business, and among all the print things, Irving Au भन्ने socialist editor ले भन्थ्यो, when intellectuals can't do anything, they start magazines भन्थ्यो, and he did the same at least once, and it requires coming together of people with interest, passion, who are willing to spend sometimes their own money, and it's rare that big publishing houses sometimes support that venture. So US ma, for example, Atlantic, New Yorker, Harper's, अहिलेसम्म survive गरेको भनेको it's not because they make profits. New Yorker, because of digital or global kind of trends, has sometimes made profit, but by and large, serious magazines or even semi-serious magazines can't make profit. That's kind of seen as a given. Khali, I think what is promising is when it goes on a digital platform and when it manages to find that set of readers. And some of the Nepal, India, publications might be able to do that. So that's what they can do, because they don't need a lot of money. And if you can get 5,000 readers who are able to chip in, I don't know, 10,000 rupees a year or something, I mean, that's a lot of working capital. So if your ideas go, opinion go, literary content back, and there are writers, it's very clear we have writers who are willing to do that, and so I think that would. The thing I wonder is, even for your thula broadsheet or like for cultural capital, it's a very easy
Yeah.
thing for them to invest in. But I guess that's a very, this us who
Still,
talk about.
one of the big publishers in India I was listening to was even floating this idea of a hybrid of like newspaper and magazine, like maybe increase the cost. Alikati tyo- is that viable? You think?
You mean print ki digital ki?
Print ke wali also he was arguing in favor of the print will not decline, print will
Decline.
continue to
Oh,
be viable, but it might have to change its form. Maybe अलिकति magazine को character हरू ल्याएर maybe
oh,
त्यो cost पनि बढ्ने खालको, maybe they will count on less people paying more खालको, अथवा I don't know.
oh. I mean, frankly, that's what all us small independent media places are trying to
Yeah,
do. Funny, digitally maybe the print ma pani, that might be the future, like a niche
yeah,
product with few readers. Um, the thing is, will they be loyal enough? I mean, a lot of people will support the first time you do it. They'll pay for it. They'll be happy about.
yeah.
Okay, Kathmandu pani यस्तो राम्रो review magazine आएछ भनेर. It will
Hmm.
definitely make waves. But it's difficult to sustain it. It's difficult to find people who will be willing to pay work in low wages for a few years while they could easily go to the next close big non-profit or whatever. So it's also difficult to retain the kind of people, because the kind of people who you want to edit that thing might not be around. It requires a level of अलिकति केही न केही cost once I feel in that kind of thing. But again, it's if mainstream media owners were smart, they would kind of latch onto it. There is a lot of credibility to be gained by doing that. It's I think they I mean, to look at something purely from the point of view of advertising revenue and readership, that might not be the smartest for those things.
Um, in uh, in view of the time, I'm aware of. I have my eye on the clock as well. So basically, मेरो sideबाट, I mean, like we could talk forever about a lot of these things. That are so two things that I want. अलिकति not. I don't want you to make predictions, but at least scenarios ko hisabma. I mean, we are already like I think you've already indicated where it might be heading. So post COVID ko at least in हाम्रो media ko landscape ma अहिले हाम्रो conversation को वरिपरिमा what would you how would you say like मलाई अलिकति त्यो बेस्ट केस र वर्स्ट केस सिनेरियोज के हुन सक्छ पोस्ट कोभिडको ल्यान्डस्केपमा, किनकि अब एउटा एकातिर हेर्दाखेरि अब देयर्स अल्सो एक्साइटिङ टाइम्स फर इन्डिपेन्डेन्ट मिडिया खालको पनि देखिन्छ, अर्कोतिर फेरि दे माइट बी इटन अप बाई लाइक हुन्छ नि अलि एउटा प्रिडिटरी अब त्यो कम्पिटिसन किल हुने खालको त्यो पनि हुन सक्छ. सो हाउ डु यु सी लाइक इट इभल्भिङ बोथ रिजनली or if you have any particular insights on Nepal as well?
I think what will happen is, and it might be good for certain readers, but might not be the best thing to happen for your media culture overall. Because a lot of reporters around the world are now freelancers or don't have full-time employment. A lot of people are starting their own small enterprises. It might be a newsletter, it might be your weekly report. So you might be a freelance. A lot of people do this. Instead of following a newspaper, you follow a reporter. Let's say this person who foreign affairs beat ekdam ramro, so you just follow that person. And so people who have spent some time in the media and have managed to gain early public appreciation for their work, they might be able to start their own sano enterprise, and then kind of capitalize that. So to capitalize on their expertise in particular fields. But institutional efforts, or like I said, small publications, independent magazines, there's all that effort going on. And there's also kind of piecemeal support of certain kinds. So a lot of, including Facebook, they're putting out money to support, experiments, for example, to plug the gap by giving certain amount of money to make sure for the next 5 months they can operate. So there are those small pockets of opportunities that they're making use of. And because, again, the number of people who no longer have a full-time reporting job or full-time editing job, they might, come together and start different things. And it might not be so. Reporters or लेख्ने reporter might take to the visual form, audio form, and I think there will be a part of general kind of public sphere मा आफ्नो voice राख्ने तरिका बढेको सँगसँगै that might happen. Again, अब कति त्यो last हुन्छ भन्ने sure छैन. You might see a particular podcast really pick up, and then maybe Kanpur wants to make it a Kanpur podcast. So there might be those things, and it might be good for particular people's individuals' career, but that might be the extent of how far that goes. That's the I mean, the hope is that independent reader-supported publications flower and bloom, and people realize that free news is not always free. There's a lot of cost that goes into it, and I think unless we can convince readers that people who can afford to pay should pay, even if it is to make sure everyone can read it. त्यो नै challenge जस्तो लाग्छ अहिले चाहिँ.
अनि त्यसमा अलिकति यहाँ एउटा I do have a couple of audience questions as well. एउटा चाहिँ it ties to sort of the misinformation in the new media, हैन भनेको दुईटा कुरा मैले अलिकति यो because I thought that would be an entirely different conversation on what television means, हैन. So मैले टिभी को खासै स्पेसिफिक सोचेको थिएन, तर particularly अहिले हाम्रो नेपालको जियोपोलिटिक्स मा Indian TV ले पनि एउटा राम्रै भूमिका खेलेको हुनाले I mean I don't say राम्रो as in के अरे अब significant भूमिका भनेको मैले क्वालिटी राम्रो नराम्रो भनेको. Also, how bad is this sort of very extremely partisan, extremely nationalist, your chauvinistic, and we do tend to see and it's globally, I think the Fox and the right-wing media in the US, I know, and you do have the so दुईटा पार्ट भयो है. एउटा overall the misinformation को कुरा, how big a challenge and a threat it is, given that अब इलेक्सन देखि पोलिटिकल प्रोसेसेसहरुमा पनि यसको इम्प्याक्टहरु हुन थालेको हैन, पर्टिकुलरली अब इन्डियन इलेक्सन कम्स टु माइन्ड. अनि त्यसपछि चाहिँ अलि लार्ज इन सिमिलर भेन दिस sort of more loud 24/7 TV networks opinion sort of journalism. So how should we understand, because as you said TV is not going to die anytime.
US को kind of media diet, and apparently for the older generation, or which is the धेरै of vote गर्ने generation को लागि TV is still the main source of their information, and they seem to legitimize social media मा आउने information after it has been validated by their Fox News. So so to some extent social media is like that place, is like that bacteria grow on it house, and then it gets picked up by your Fox News or in India or any one of those private channels, and then it becomes a real news that way. So there's also a very interesting symbiotic relationship between the two. A lot of conspiratorial figures or conspiracy theory figures have moved into the internet space from mainstream media because they find a bigger audience there, more freedom, and everyone wants more journalistic freedom, so they find it more there. So I think it is still not clear to what extent purely electoral impact is difficult to say, but what is clear is the popular level individual, what used to be a big political subject and a big political debate has kind of permeated in a very vulgarized fashion to the common reader, the common viewer. So I think this information ko त्यो aspects in Nepal India ko your recent tensions happen देखिन्छ, like the tensions have now gone from kind of diplomatic level to people's level. I think that's what social media platforms particularly tend to feed, and honestly, if you look at reports on how Facebook's algorithm has been performing, for example, it seems to amplify. It's just the way the algorithm is coded. It tends to amplify the most obnoxious stuff because they have the AIs pick up everything on how often people click, where do they start the video, for example. Azkal Facebook tells you start from this second, because a lot of people just know agadi aako stuff is pointless. So it's gone to that level. So I think it informs not just our democratic political behavior, but a lot of social behavior, it seems. The role of Nepal, India, specifically, how television media, they're exacerbated what already was happening. That is like, I think that was the most clear thing that came out. It's something that has been happening with India and Pakistan for a long time now. And I think we Nepalis, we were used to being patronized, but we found what like bile looks like when it comes from that space. And they are very conscious that this is what seems to increase TRPs, which allows them to charge advertisers more. So they have a very clear-cut model. So we shouldn't be too animated by seeing them amp up this as if they are scheming. This is what they're expected to do. And Nepal ma bhako ban harule त्यति फरक नपार्ला.
So I have I think we can go from the note I get, we can go 5 minutes more. So एउटा अर्को क्वेसन हाम्रो म्याक्सिम जीबाट is around त्यो sort of like a concerning scene around press freedom छ हैन. Press freedom is abysmal in South Asia, and we seem to be getting worse every year. What do you think is why do you think this is the case, and what can be done, or how should we think about it, Khalgo?
I mean, I mentioned the state media relation, but now to come to the society in that picture, there is also general anti-media atmosphere. So Nepal has an anti-civil society atmosphere. There's a lot of anti-politics, anti-activism. Everything is because of failures of, I guess, political hopes and certain. And it's a very common thing you see. It's you see that in like reactions to political changes. Anyways, so we are going through that phase which is why if you look at the online sphere, त्यहाँ हुने मैले धेरै इन्टरभ्यु हेरेर हुन्छु certain खालका YouTube personalities who analyze politics and what's going on, and it's very clear. It's against. It used all the minority positions 7-8 years ago, pro-monarchy, certain kind of anti-federalism, certain kind of it's masked in anti-globalization, but it basically is extreme kind of nationalist right-wing politics around certain ethnicity and cultural markers. So that is making a very strong comeback in that space. It hasn't found mainstream media, that still doesn't come, because our mainstream media editors still know these are liberal things to say and these are like these don't. But I mean, that also might change. That might be the interesting change in Nepal. Now that you have a lot of professional journalists out of their jobs, I mean, we don't know if in a few months it picks up, but I think anyways, एउटा खालको social coalition बनिरहेछ online, and so that's the thing. The anti-democratic forces have, for some reason, really cracked this. Like they've excelled in marketing their product, including audience. They're not selling it now yet, Nepal at least. So the question of free speech is like, I think हामीहरुमै पनि अब press freedom र general free speech मा फरक धेरै छुट्याउन खोज्नु पनि कहिलेकाहीँ प्रब्लम हुन्छ. लाइक जर्नलिस्ट भयो भने मात्रै बोल्न पाइन्छ सर्टेन कुरा, सो there's a lot of absence of clarity in those fundamental values. So they might return strongly.
I think towards you only wrap up. I'm just checking for new questions. So basically, there were so many things that I had in mind. So हामीले अब नेपालमा maybe towards the very end, how so I think that the whole idea of like हुन्छ नि त्यो अलिकति अलि फ्रिल्यान्सिङतिर जाने अनि प्लस प्रोफेसनल जर्नलिस्टहरू आउट अफ द फर्मल ऊ भएर एउटा एउटा सोसल कोएलिसन बन्ने भनेको आई थिङ्क दोज आर भेरी भेरी सort of really fascinating insights. So हामी from नेपालको लेन्सबाट what would you like to see happen, like what do you feel missing, and maybe by the way of like if you have some words of advice for people who have out just lost jobs, or like with all due sympathy to all our friends who've lost jobs in tough time, but generally what do you think is missing, and what, because I think in our previous conversation you were mentioning how at least certain quality of reporting has improved in Nepal, no? So like we do have some capital around that. So where would you like this thing to go in Nepal, and any other thoughts and insights to people who might be thinking around the same lines?
I mean, I think one thing I would say is people should explore those individual options, but that should also be a way to that should be a force multiplier for institutional things they might want to do, and I would love if more reporters and editors come together to form institutions that are that they have say over. The magazine I mentioned that got closed down in Pakistan, Newsline one, Mohammad Hanif was a reporter there. So they were actually it was founded by a bunch of reporters who left another very well-known magazine, Herald, and they formed a cooperative. This was in 80s, I think, early 80s, and they formed a cooperative, and they all put money into it, and it wasn't very it's very old-fashioned financial structure. So it worked for them quite well, until for various reasons they couldn't sustain themselves. After it became an institution. So, and there are various ways you can find support for it inside the country and outside. But people have to start exploring. Those have their own limits, and sometimes you have to be careful about the kind of support you take, because you don't want to make it easy for people to delegitimize you. That's the other big danger, really. So I think forming institutions might be, and it can be done slowly. You can start with things that are run in a very simple blog, simple SoundCloud things, but in a few months, years, that could take financial shape. So I think those are some things that they can do. Our people who already are in mainstream media, sometimes you also feel maybe there's a, so this has been the big complaint in India and Pakistan, is that editors not standing up when their reporters are.
We have heard that in Nepal as well.
And not being paid wages. This has been going on for a long time. So that's a simpler issue to stand up for. I can understand you can't stand up when it's financial issue like now, and it looks like there's a lot of shortfall, so you have to cut jobs. That are not paying salaries for several months. That is unacceptable, and it seems to happen in South Asia too often. And it's a bigger statement on our the way we run institutions, and how we think about the people who work. And that's, I don't know how to solve that, but perhaps it's enough now to for plenty of us to point those fingers. Maybe for a long time we don't have a media beat also. There isn't a lot of media reporting. There is some blogs, Aruma, you see My Sansar and other places.
When we have My Sansar in one person,
that would be a great new institution, like serious gossip on media affairs. Like, that's something that would be a great product, I think.
I think that's about the time that we can go. Shubhanga, it's been a great pleasure. This has been greatly fascinating for me, and I hope there are a lot of takeaways for a lot of our listeners and viewers. Thank you very much for making the time, and I'll give you the final word.
Thank you for inviting me. It was great fun. I know I was very scattered, and the lines of analysis might have been very incomplete, but thanks for. I think it's an interesting conversation, and maybe you can also call people from different aspects, people who are undergoing these experiences, to get inside voice also.
Uh, so thank you very much. Thank you for all the audience. I would like to thank, as always, the organizing team at the Coyote Cove Bookshop, my friends at Corona Lounge. That was my conversation with Shubhanga Pandey, who is why is the associate word coming with me? He's an editor with Himal Southasian, formerly Kathmandu-based, now Colombo-based. So love to hear back from what you guys think about this thing. It should be up, the video should be up on the Facebook and eventually on YouTube, I hope. Do share it. I think there are some really important insights. And for me, so I think despite a lot of challenges, I think the independent media, the coalition, building coalitions with similar-minded collaborations, and finding alternate source. And for those people, I think one takeaway that Subhanga said, those who can afford to pay for the news is I think there are like a lot of really important things. So thank you, Subhanga. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.